Well, there we go. Now you can hear me. Wow. I apologize for that. I will fix that and let people know in the time. Uh, um, I didn't have any audio for the beginning, and I apologize. Have been doing great today. Haven't been feeling that wonderful. A lot of people know that I haven't been streaming. My voice is just not the same. I'm physically, mentally, the whole bunch of different things. I just have a hard time streaming any longer. A lot of things are difficult for me, but this was something that was so bad that I have to stream about, because this isn't like your typical creationist that just has misunderstandings when it comes to things like science. It's not your typical creationist who argues things like, oh, Noah's Ark, or the age of the Earth being, radiometric is wrong, and all that nonsense that you typically find from creationists. What it is this guy's fundamentally flawed from a foundational level when it comes to logic. And so I would think that a creationist would want to be able to understand basic logic. And so I will be streaming with Josh Garver, who is a friend of mine who's a mathematician, over this probably tomorrow or next week. But I kind of want to give you guys an intro on what I've been dealing with. But this guy has been tagging me nonstop on Facebook. So I apologize for the quality of my voice. Nothing I can do about it. Like I said, you guys know I have not been streaming live hardly at all. I've been doing standalone videos with AI voice. It's going to be probably that way for a while. I don't know if I ever go back to streaming. I'm not really up, excuse me, feeling great to stream most of these days. But this was something that was just so ridiculous that I wanted to stream about it. So anyways, hi, Oni and Gardner. Hi, John. This was my blog that I wrote to him. I'm not going to go over that today because I do want to go over this with Josh. But it's called My Response to Somebody Who's Woefully Confused About Basic Logic. I would ask you guys to please read this, and if you find any logical errors in it, please let me know. The guy's name is Ryan or Riri. I have no idea. But to say that he's probably the worst person I've ever seen trying to discuss logic would be an understatement. He has gotten 90% of what he says wrong, probably. It is so bad on a fundamental level that like I said, I had to do a video on it. And unfortunately, I didn't take one of my pills, and my stomach is not doing great. So I can already feel it already in my voice and my esophagus. But I'm having some coffee. So I don't know how long I'll be able to go here, but I'm going to try. But real quick, this guy's been posting all over my Facebook. He was in a creationist group, and he got he got suspended for a little while in the creationist group. So I haven't really responded to him on that, but he's been posting just ad nauseum on my Facebook page, which I've included in the video description. And he just posts the same nonsense over and over and over again, because his understanding is so fundamentally wrong when it comes to propositional logic. So can you guys see this? I know it's small, but can you guys see this? This is something he just posted yesterday, and of course he tags me on it, which I've already addressed. It's literally, I explain it right here. I explain it in my blog. I go through step by step, explain all his issues. There's a couple things I didn't explain to him, which I've explained it subsequently, but because I didn't get into the truth tables with this one, I might be doing it in a part 2. But propositional logic deals with truth tables. It deals with whether a proposition is true or false. And he doesn't understand what a proposition even is. He doesn't understand how a premise is related to an argument. He doesn't understand valid versus sound. He doesn't understand the fallacies he's throwing out there, like affirmative consequent, at all, like in any way, shape, or form. He thinks he does, but he really doesn't. And anybody who knows logic will easily look at what he says and says, yeah, this is completely just gobbledygook. But if you guys can read this, he says the original argument. You know what? Maybe I can do this. Oh, yeah, there we go. All right. So he says the original argument. Now, guys, I want you guys to really look at this, right? I mean, seriously, look at it. He says, premise 1: if all life shares a common ancestry, then all life will share a common. Oh my God! I get so many messages throughout the day. So many notifications. If all life shares a common ancestry, then all life will share common genetics. Okay. Premise 2, life shares common genetics. Conclusion, therefore, universal common ancestry is not falsified through genetics and could still be true. Typical evolutionary conclusion. Therefore, common ancestry is a fact, affirming the consequent. Now, there's some problems with this. Now, first of all, this is affirming the consequent if you really want to be technical, even though his conclusion doesn't really make much sense, because you can infer, I guess, that it's the conclusion from a affirming the consequent, but really it should look like this. Way an affirmative consequent would look is, this is your proposition P, called an atomic proposition. If all life shares a common ancestry, then all life will share common genetics, which is your proposition Q for your atomic proposition. So this right here is called a material implication, if then. What it's asking is, if this condition is such, and this condition is such, then what is this condition for the premise? That's what it's asking. So the way a material implication works is that if this is true, and then this is true, then this premise has to be true. And we'll get into that. I'll show you how that works in a truth table. But for right now, let's look at the structure of the argument. He says life shares common genetics. Okay, so he's affirming P right here, right? He's affirming the consequent. This is called the consequent. This is why it's called affirming the consequent. He's affirming premise, that's premise 2, that the consequent is true. This should be a conclusion, then all life will share common genetics. That's the conclusion for affirming the consequent. Now, could you infer that from this? Yeah, maybe, but I mean, why throw in the universal term? Why throw in not falsified? Why throw in could, which is more along the lines of a modality of possibilities, right? He's throwing in all this unnecessary stuff when it should be to show what a affirming the consequent fallacy would be. Would read, if all life shares a common ancestry, then all life will share common genetics. Life shares common genetics, which is Q. Therefore, therefore, all life will share common ancestry. Right? That's the fallacy, because he's putting forth a premise for material condition or material implication, which, as a person who agrees with evolutionary theory, I would hold as true. Right? This is, to me, is true. This is true. And if you look at the truth table, then the premise is true. In fact, the only way this premise can be false is in one specific case. And the only way this premise could be false is if this is true and this is false. That's it. No other conditions. If both these are true, this is true. If this is false, then this is true. It doesn't matter what even Q is. If P is false and a material implication, then the premise is always true. Always. And it does not matter if this is related to this. That's where he makes a fundamental mistake. He thinks that all life shares common ancestry somehow has something to do with this, and it doesn't. It doesn't need to be. This is classical logic, also known as intentional logic. It has nothing to do with relevance. There's something called relevance logic out there, but that's not what we're talking about. So he gets it affirming the consequent correctly, but I don't think he understands why this is affirming the consequent. It has nothing to do with the relationship between here and here. This is affirming the consequent because it's in the logical form of if P, then Q, Q therefore P. And if you look at the truth tables here, we'll look at affirming the consequent, if P, then Q, Q therefore P. That's it. That's it. That's the only way that this could ever be affirming the consequent. It has nothing to do with the relationship of P and Q. Nothing at all. It's also known as the fallacy of the converse. Okay, so in his response to me, and he's so I think he's getting that as correct as affirming the consequent for the wrong reason. But let's look at what he goes on to say here. And again, this is just what he wrote yesterday. He's written me so much nonsense that it's hard to even keep up because he's not trying to learn the subject material correctly. But he says Steve's argument, and he also says that I say that the only way that life can share, he says that I argue that the only way that we can share common genetics is if life shares common ancestry, which is not necessarily true. Do I believe that to be the case? Yes, but there's no metaphysical necessity there. He could argue that God made it look like that. Aliens did it. He could argue that we share common genetics, but not common ancestry. He can argue we share common ancestry, but not common genetics. You can argue anything you want. But in science, we share common ancestry and we share common genetics. That's true in science. So in the scientific realm, both those statements are true. If you want to argue they're not, that's your business. But we're talking about logic here. And he doesn't understand the logic that he's doing. He doesn't understand the fact that the types of rules of inferences that he's using are only based upon the truth values of the premises of the argument, which are these, which are formulated from the atomic propositions. But the atomic propositions can be false and the argument's still sound. He doesn't understand that. So real quickly, if an argument has a proper rule of inference, it's valid. If it's valid and has true premises, then it's sound. But the premises that deal with whether it's sound or not are not these premises. That's where he's making a huge mistake, right? It is not because if these are true or false necessarily. It has to do with this premise here. This is what it's asking. If then is the premise. It's called a material implication. So if this is false, P is false, and Q is false, and you look at a truth table like this one right here, I happen to have one, which I'll make bigger for you. What does it say for logical implication, which is really a material implication? Well, it says, okay, if P is false and Q is false, what does it make the material implication? True. Again, this is only false if and only if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. That's the only time. If you look carefully, there's no case in this truth table where if P is false, this material implication is true. I mean, it's false. Not one. It's always true. So if P is false, you can automatically say this is true because there's no condition where this is false and this is true. None. So this premise has got to be true unless he argues that all life shares a common ancestry is true, which he doesn't because he's a creationist, and this is false. So I don't know what he argues, but again, according to science, both these are correct. But let's look at my argument here. I said, I don't remember where I said this, but we'll go with it. If all life shares common genetics, then all life shares common ancestry. Okay. He says this is the fallacy of invalid inference. Well, here's a huge problem with this. You cannot have a fallacy of invalid inference from a single premise. It's impossible. An invalid inference means that you have two premises, and the second premise doesn't follow from the first, or the conclusion doesn't follow from the first. You need two or more premises to have an invalid inference. A single premise is either true or it's false. It cannot be unsound. It cannot be sound. It cannot be valid. It cannot be invalid. All a premise can be in propositional logic is if it's true or false. That's it. And by the way, I hope you guys have been enjoying my series on intro to logic. I know people have balked at the AI, but I'm sorry. My voice and my ability to do live streaming and make these videos with my own voice is very difficult any longer. And so I just kind of have not been able to do so. And so if you don't like the AI, I don't know what to tell you. I hope that you just stick around for the content. But again, this was so bad that I was like, I'm just going to drink some coffee and I'm just going to go for it today and stream. But I think you guys can hear that I don't feel great. And I need to take something that I didn't take. So I got to do that when I get done. But at least my coffee is good. So anyways, so this makes no sense. And what I think he did was this. I noticed that he uses AI and Google a lot, but he doesn't understand Google Foo. He doesn't understand what he's reading. Now, AI is a great tool. Don't get me wrong. I actually like AI. Grok is interesting. I had been doing a lot of philosophy stuff with Grok from Twitter. But you have to understand the subject material at least basically enough to know when it makes a mistake. And the logic that these AIs use are wrong a lot of times. And I'll do a separate video on that because some of them are better at logic than others. Grok is mediocre to decent, but not perfect by any means. It's probably the best I've seen. But ChatGPT 3.5 absolutely sucks at logic. It gets basic logic wrong. And I don't think he understands that. I think he's one of those AI people that just whatever it says on AI he goes with. And the problem is we all might be biased somewhat, and we all might be accountable for for this. We might all do it who uses AI, but I try not to. I double, triple check. I make sure that I have a foundational understanding of the material before I run it through AI and try to get their feedback on that. And I think that's what it's used for. I think that's healthy to check with an artificial intelligence, which is just like Google. I mean, when you do a Google search, you're checking your information, but you want to make sure that you have at least a basic understanding of the subject material to know what Google's telling you, right? And you put it as a grok. It's grok, and it comes from slam RN. It's actually interesting because you might know this, but it's actually from my favorite book. My favorite all-time book of all time is called A Stranger in a Strange Land, and it was written by Heinlein, Robert Heinlein. And it's a brilliant book. And it's basically about a guy that has rights to the entire planet of Mars because he was born on Mars and raised by aliens. And it's just such a good book. But grok means to understand. If I say I grok that means I understand that. I apprehend it, but on a very fundamental level. It's like at the core essence of understanding. It's like the highest degree of apprehension is to grok something, I guess. That's the way I understand grok. But it really is like to really understand the essence of something. Did I ever cover the Reg Jimbov conversation? No. When did that happen? I don't remember that. Did I you would have to refresh my memory, Skeptic. I asked Reds today if he wanted to do this with me, but he hasn't gotten back to me. But anyways, let's look at this argument here. So he says this is a fallacy of the invalid reference. What I think he did was this. I think he just searched it, right? And if I just do a Google search, it says right here, what is an example of an invalid inference? If you're different, then you are irreplaceable. This is an invalid inference because this is the converse of the original statement. But he's thinking this is an invalid inference because just because you're different doesn't mean you're irreplaceable, which is true, but irrelevant. Irrelevant. The reason why this is an invalid reference, because if you actually go to the source, it shows the initial premise that it's an invalid reference too. Right here. In order to be irreplaceable, one must be different. Coco Chanel. So basically, if replaceable, then different. Okay, that's the premise. And then if you did the converse of that, you just exchanged Q for P and P for Q. If you are different, then you're irreplaceable. Different implies irreplaceable, which does not follow logically. This is an invalid inference. This is from this because you're inferring the converse from this. This right here is not an invalid inference. You cannot have an invalid inference from a single premise. This is the converse of the original statement. The converse is an invalid inference because the statement and the converse are not logically equivalent. Can it be? Yes, but if we have something that's equivalent, that's a logical equivalency. Like a contrapositive is a logical equivalency, which is P implies Q, not Q implies not P. Those are logically equivalent statements to each other. You can replace one for the other in a logical argument. That is a valid inference called the law of contrapositive, which I went over in one of my videos. So this statement right here, that this is a fallacy of the invalid reference, is completely BS. It shows that he doesn't understand that a single premise cannot be fallacious. An invalid inference means an inference. You cannot have an inference with a single premise. The inference is your second premise. Or actually, the conclusion is the inference, but this is just positing this as a premise. This is the inference, right? And affirming the consequent of the original argument. You cannot have affirming the consequent as a logical error in a single premise. Affirming the consequence, excuse me, affirming the consequent, if you actually look at the form, is if P then Q, the Q then P. That's it. This is the form. You need this form to have a fallacy of the converse or affirming the consequent. This is the form it has to be in. You cannot have if P then Q and then say it's affirming the consequent because you haven't gone any further yet. You could say if P then Q, which is completely valid. That's modus ponens, also known as affirming the antecedent. So if I say if P then Q, then all of a sudden this is modus ponens. So how can a single premise in his twisted way of thinking about logic, how can a single premise be affirming the consequent of the original argument? No, there's nothing about the original argument that's irrelevant. This is a completely new argument. This has no relevance to this argument. They're absolutely isolated from each other. There's just nothing about this argument that has anything to do with this argument whatsoever. So you can't say it's affirming the argument consequent from the original argument. It makes no sense. So let's look at this. If P, then Q, then I affirm P, right? And if you look again, right here, what is it called when you affirm the antecedent? P? Oh, modus ponens. If P, then Q, affirming the antecedent P, you can conclude then it is valid because it logically follows Q. Okay? And so I logically follow Q. All life has common ancestor. See that? So if P, right? If P, then Q, this is true. This premise is true. All life shares common genetics. That's true, according to science. Again, if creationists want to argue differently, fine, whatever. But in the realm of science, this is a valid and sound argument. And it has nothing to do with because this is related to this. It has to do with the fact that this is true, this is true, this is true, and the form is modus ponens, meaning it's valid and therefore sound because the premises 1 and 2 are sound, or let me say are valid. Again, premises are not sound or unsound. They're true or false. Now, if this was false and this was false, right? If I said if it is not the case that life shares common genetics, or it's not the case that life shares a common ancestry, or just assume that P is false and assume that Q is false, what's the truth value of the premise? See, he's thinking if either one of these is false, it's unsound. Which, no, that's not how it works. In fact, if this is false and this is false, this makes this. Can you guys figure it out? Do you guys know what this is? I'll give you a second. I'll even show you the truth table. Here's the truth table for material implication. If P is false and Q is false, what does it make the material implication? I'll give you a hint. T stands for true. Again, this is only false if P is true and Q is false. If P is true, then this is always going to be. If P is false, this is always going to be true. Always. So, if I said something along the lines of, which I have before, if 1 + 1 = 3, then 2 + 2 = 5, that makes the premise true because both the antecedent and the consequent are false. Both P and Q are false. And that makes the premise true. It's called a vacuous truth, which he was aware of because he cited me Wikipedia on it, but he obviously didn't understand what he was reading. So fallacious first premise is nonsense. Argument is therefore invalid. Okay, think about this, guys. Think about this. How in the world, if this is invalid, if this is modus ponens, which is one of the most foundational rules of inference there are, you cannot have an argument that's invalid if P implies Q, P therefore Q. You cannot have it. If P, then Q, P, therefore Q. Affirming the antecedent modus ponens is always valid, always, always, always. It doesn't matter what P and Q stand for. That's irrelevant. Irrelevant to the validity of the argument. And so it's just so fundamentally flawed. And then he says, therefore, unsound. If it was invalid, then it would be unsound, but it's not. Then he says, reframing of arguments, Steve's argument, first premise. All life shares common genetics because all life is related. Confirmation bias. Well, that's irrelevant. And affirming the consequent. You cannot have affirming the consequent of some other argument. It has no relevancy to any other argument. You cannot take one argument and then somehow relate it to some other argument because it's not affirming the consequent, because affirming the consequent, once again, is in the form if P then Q, Q therefore P. But I have if P then Q, P therefore Q. Do you understand how wrong this guy is? I mean, how practically wrong? I mean, he's not even wrong, as they say, right? I mean, it's just so wrong, it's not even wrong. And so he doesn't understand that it just goes by truth tables. And if you think about this, if you look at a truth table for connective, like and, if I were to say in premise 1, if a cat is a mammal and the sun is a star, then what would be the truth value of the premise? Well, that's an and connective, right? So you just say, okay, A cat is a mammal. That's true. The sun is a star. That's true. So if P and Q for a connective of and, what makes the statement, the premise? Well, you go to the truth tables here, and you find and, which is a little upside down caret symbol. It looks like a part of an A. That's an easy way to remember it. It just looks kind of like an A without the middle bar across it. But if P is true and Q is true, then the NAND function is true. The only way the NAND function, the AND function is the only way the AND function is false is if P or Q or both of them are false. But if P and Q are true, that's what this function is detecting for. It's saying, okay, is it the case that both of these atomic propositions are true? Yes. If they're both true, then the AND function will come back with a true. If one or both of them are false, then it comes back as false. That's what the AND function does, right? The OR function is similar, but it's detecting if one or either, called inclusive OR, are true. If P is true or Q is true, then P or Q is true. The only time P or Q is false is if P and Q are false. If both these are false, then this comes back as an OR function is false. The imply function, which if P then Q is an implied function, if you want to think about it that way. It's a function just like an AND or an OR or a NAND or exclusive OR. It's just a Boolean binary operation on two operands. And the binary operation is, how does this operand relate to this operand? Well, in the imply function, if this is true and this is true, then the implied function is true. If this is true and this is false, then the implied function is false. That's what it's asking. So I'm going back to the original. If this is true and this is true, then this is true. So in the case of an AND function, if all cats are mammals, then, or if a cat is a mammal and then the sun is a star, that's true. It doesn't care if there's any relationship between cats and stars. Absolutely, unequivocally, 100% irrelevant in propositional logic. There are other logics that deal with that, called relevance logics or relevancy logic. But that's neither here nor there. I don't even deal with relevance logic. I mean, the only thing you'll really of interest in relevance logic is you cannot apply the double negation rule. Because I think it's a form of intuitionist logic. And in intuitionist logic, you can apply double negation. So I don't think you can in relevance logic, but I would have to look that up. But I know in intuitionist logic, you cannot use the double negation rule. You have to derive P from some other way rather than not P. And I do think relevance logic is a type of intuitionist logic, but don't quote me on that. I will have to look that up. Yeah, Skeptic, I can get into that in a minute. I'll get back to that. But do you see how that all these premises do is just do an evaluation of some kind of function, whether it be, at least in propositional logic, you have the operands, which is P and Q, which are the atomic propositions. Then you have the function, which is and, NAND, or imply. So in this particular case, he says final argument. I'll just read this. I'll just go through the rest of this because this is so bad. Because again, confirmation bias has nothing to do with anything. From the consequent from the original argument has nothing to do with anything. My argument, premise one: if an argument is invalid, it's also unsound. That is true. One of the very few things he gets right. Premise two: if an argument commits a fallacy, it's invalid, therefore unsound. Well, not necessarily, but we're talking about if it's a non sequitur fallacy, then it's invalid, right? But informal fallacies are completely different. But if he's talking about a formal logical fallacy, then this would be correct. But not necessarily with an informal fallacy. Okay, you got to remember there's something called a fallacy, which means that you say that the fallacy is wrong because some kind of informal fallacy or some kind of fallacy, it could be a formal fallacy, even because of the argument is structured wrong or premises is false. And so you say that the conclusion is false. That's a fallacy because the conclusion could very well be true, and you could have some bogus argument for it that's completely wrong. So you can't say that the conclusion is flawed. What you can say is the conclusion doesn't follow from the argument, right? the premise, if life shares common genetics, then they share common ancestry, is an invalid inference. No, it's not, because it's not an inferential statement. There's no inference there. All that is an implication, an imply function. P implies Q. That's it. You cannot have an invalid inference in an implied statement. The relevancy between P and Q does not matter. And that's what he doesn't understand. He just doesn't groke that. Invalid inferences are fallacies. Sure. Conclusion. Therefore, the argument, if life shares common genetics and they share common ancestry, life shares common genetics, therefore they share common ancestry, is invalid and sound. No, it's absolutely valid. And because of science, it's sound. Because science says that this is true, and science says that this is true. If a creationist wants to argue those aren't true, okay, fine. But I don't think, it's not a matter of I don't think. I know he doesn't know the logic. I am absolutely convinced. I know for a fact he doesn't understand the logic. Because it's completely valid. This is, in fact, what do you guys think this is? Skeptic. I'll answer your question if you could tell me what this rule of inference is. If P, then Q, P, therefore Q. What do you think that is? Do you want? And I'll even put the which one of these is. And think about this. You're affirming the antecedent here, by the way. Maybe let's go back to this, right? I'm positing this material implication. I'm positing the. I'm affirming that P is true here, right? This is why it's called affirming the antecedent. I'm affirming that P is true here. So I'm saying this is an implication. This is true, and if this is all true, then this has to be true by implication. That's your implication. You're deriving that from the first two premises, which is the first premise of the material implication, if life shares common genetics and they share common ancestry, and the second premise, which is affirming the proposition P is true. If that's the case, then you can just go here and you can say, if P, then Q, P, then Q. Oh, hang on. There we go. So which form of logic is that particular form taking here? I don't know. I like I said, I always call it groke. If it's not, that's fine. I'll take correction on that. Slam RN. I will look into it. But that's how I've always pronounced it, as groke. That's how I've always heard it. But I love that book. So can you guess which one it is, Skeptic? And I've already given it away. It's clearly this form, right? It's clearly modus ponens. If P, then Q, P, then Q. So how in the world does he think this is invalid? Why? Because he thinks that because this doesn't necessarily relate to this, it's invalid. No, that has no relevancy in propositional logic. If he wants to argue it's unsound, he has to tell me what premise he thinks is false. And he's never been able to do that. He's not competent enough to even have a cordial conversation with, to even determine which is false. Because in order for premise one to be false, he has to argue that this is true and this is false. Right? That's the only way that he can argue this. That's the only way. Then he can say the proposition is false. So yeah, I don't know what else to explain to this guy, because he's, like I said, he's so flawed at the foundational level that is scary. But the problem is with this, I'm sorry, he has to argue that this is false. Common ancestry is false. Not this one. I'm sorry. Boo-boo. So I can correct my own stuff because I know what I'm talking about. In order for this to be false, this has to be true, right? And this has to be false, right? If P implies Q, the only way that can be false is if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. So he has to accept premise 2, right? If he accepts premise 2 is true, then this makes this true. And the only way for this to be false, to be unsound, is if then he argues that life doesn't share common ancestry, which I have no idea if he argues or not. That is the only way for that to be unsound in that condition, if he wants to affirm proposition or the premise 2. Does that make sense, guys? So I don't know what he affirms and what he doesn't affirm for him to think that it's unsound, because in science, this is completely sound. So he says, all my presents. Oh, Savani, thank you. Not trying to derail the conversation. Carry on. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. I can definitely use that. I'm not streaming as much as I used to. I only make about $1 a video when I do my my Logic videos. So I don't make anything on them. Those videos take several hours to make, by the way. Even though I'm getting better at it. But even my intro to videos to Logic, I mean, those could take upwards of 8 hours. But I am getting better. I'm trying to figure out a way to make these videos that I do standalone. I want to be able to do them in 4 hours, and I might be at that point now. But a lot of the problems I have is with the AI speech to text. That's my biggest issue because it doesn't pronounce things right, and so I've got to fiddle with some of the phonetics. I got to make sure it sounds right. I got to make sure it reads right because I'm not the one speaking it. An AI is, and so I have to write the script for it, have the AI convert it to speech, then put it in my video program, and then make the video out of it using graphics, which takes a significant amount of time. Even though I'm getting the hang of using these graphic programs, there is still a learning curve to be had there, to be saying the sure, to be had. Chemo says maybe stick around to Flatland and put Highland and the Grok thing aside for now. Yeah, I love Flatland. Again, Flatland is probably one of my favorite. Well, no, not even probably. It is absolutely one of my all-time favorite books. I still like Stranger in a Strange Land better. But Flatland's right up there. So yeah, I absolutely love that book, dude. That was written by Edwin Abbott, and extremely good book. JJ says, "Hey Steve, just stopping by to say hello and hit the thumbs up. Have an awesome weekend." Thank you, JJ. Thank you. Please say hi to Sophie Queen and everybody over on that side of the YouTube spheres. And like I said, I haven't been able to really go on panels or even do much live, and I apologize. Sorry, not sorry, but as you can tell, it's just something that I'm not up for. I haven't been for like a year. It really takes a lot out of me, and I've been trying, but the AI and broken closed caption system combination is the worst. Yeah, well, I will be doing a video on the AIs because, like I said, some of them get things right, some of them don't, and they're really bad. Skeptic says, you just made $6. Yay, thank you. I appreciate it. I am going to be doing a debate on the Non Sequitur show because I've been asked to moderate. It was supposed to be tonight, but they got their time zones mixed up because one's in Pakistan, one's in Eastern time, and I'm in Pacific, and I got it all right, but they got it incorrect. So I had to postpone it because they hosed it all up. But I will be doing that if people ask me to. So I will be I'm still putting out stuff, and I will try to moderate debates in the Non Sequitur show. But I really want to do the standalone videos. Matter of fact, Kimomaki, the video I'm working on now is actually on the Frege embedding problem. I've written in the script. I just have to be able to figure out how to get AI to pronounce certain words correctly because it has a really hard time pronouncing not cognitivist. And I'm not going to mock AI for that because I mispronounce words all the time. But when I'm writing a script and I want people to apprehend it, and if it can't say moral non-cognitivist properly, so you see the problem there, right, man? So I've been trying to fix that problem. I think I've got it in close. And so I've written the script for because you had asked for me to do something on the Frege embedding problem. And I want to do that for you because you're a longtime friend of the channel and a moderator. And I think I wrote a pretty good script. I think I really do explain the Frege embedding problem at a very, very basic but apprehendable level. Because I think you said that it was kind of a sticking point that you had. I think you'll like the video. I think you'll like the script because it does explain it. I just have to, one, get the AI to speak it right, and two, put it in my video software, which I'm still learning, in order to make the graphics for it. Like if you watch my graphics for the one I did on Logic, yeah, that requires some time, right? So. But anyways, let's go back to this real quick. But thank you, Skeptic. Appreciate it very much. So this is just complete nonsense, right? I mean, do you guys agree so far that this guy has no clue what he's talking about in Logic? He says, all my premises are true, therefore a conclusion naturally follows. Unlike Steve's fallacious drivel, this conclusion is simple deductive fact. Okay, whatever. Final argument. Premise 1. If bioengineering is true, then common genetics do not logically denote common ancestry because common genetics can be the clearly resolved line. This is just so poorly worded, right? Again, for a implication, you just want P in there for Q, right? That's all you want, right? He's just trying to throw in these weird, expository here that's not required, right? Because now you've made Q this entire statement. This is Q. This is what you're trying to show from P. So if bioengineering is true, which I don't know what that means, right? I mean, what is it? What is it about bioengineering is true? I don't know. I don't think that's even propositionally truth apt, right? Because bioengineering is a noun here, right? That's like saying lamp is true. Matter of fact, yeah, I'm just going to say it's not truth apt. This is not a proposition. This is non-propositional. I mean, if I say lamp is true, what does that mean? So he doesn't even have a proposition here. It's not truth apt. I mean, what is he even asking about bioengineering? It's the same thing. If I say science is true, that's not a proposition, actually, because science is a noun there. That's like saying Steve is true. You can say a part of science is true, or something in bioengineering is true, but saying science is true is not actually logically correct, because you can't have a noun being true or false, right? You can say science acquires knowledge. That's a true statement, right? Yeah, I mean, it's a charitable. Lamp exists. Charitable interpretation, sure. Bioengineering exists, but again, his understanding is so poor that I can't give him principle of charity any longer. I did it initially, but I'm just not going to do it anymore. But he says bioengineering is true, which again, not propositional. Therefore, common genetics do not logically point to common ancestry, but irrelevant. This is not the conclusion from this. Again, you're invoking logic here, saying common genetics do not logically point. You haven't established that. The only thing you conclude is this. This is your consequent. This statement here, then Q. Now, can you reword your consequent and or antecede it as a conclusion to make it a little more readable? Absolutely, we do this all the time, right? Right. You change one minor thing because it's just easier to read. That's fine. We can understand that. That's not in a formal proof I want to do that, but I mean in most cases, if you want to say life share common ancestry, and you conclude with all life is related, okay, that's synonymous. I'm not going to care about that. It's no big deal. But you at least have to understand the basics, and the basics here is the consequent is this entire statement Q. So this conclusion makes no sense. This is what's called a non sequitur. So Steve will undoubtedly ignore the arguments and prove him wrong. Well, nothing here proved him wrong. What it did is show that he doesn't understand the very basics. And going back to my blog real quick, my response to somebody who is woefully confused about basic logic, I wrote it a couple days ago. Please go read it in the video description and let me know what you think. But I do point out some very specific issues of his understanding, because I'll just read the first one and then I'm going to go over it with Josh when I can. But he says, one, the logically sound and valid argument is as follows: if common ancestry, if P, then common genetics, then Q. What? This is not an argument. This is not an argument. This is a statement. This is an implied function. That's not an argument. He's only got this part of the argument. If P, then Q. All these rules of inference, two of which are fallacies, which are the form of the consequent of denying the antecedent, you start with if P, then Q. Right? So this is not an argument. This is a premise one. If P, then Q. So I explained to him this is neither valid nor sound argument because it doesn't conform to the structure of an argument. In logic, an argument consists of a set of statements called premises that lead to a conclusion. If P, then Q is not an argument. It is a statement and can be used as a premise in an argument. If P and Q is called a conditional implication, which is in basic logic sometimes ostensibly referred to as a material implication, which is P implies Q. There's some technicalities there, and I wanted to be anal, to be honest with you, because this right here would be more considered what's called a conditional implication. This right here is technically a material implication. They are used interchangeably for the most part, and I'm fine with that. But some advanced courses that I've looked into, they do have some distinctions between them. So just wanted to note that. So I say, but may have some more subtle differences and more nuanced discussions relating to logic. But it starts off that he doesn't even understand what an actual argument really is, right? Because this is not sound, this is not valid, this is not invalid, this is not unsound. This is either true or false because this is a single premise of an implied function. That's it. Can you guys get the fact that he's just not understanding the most basic things of propositional logic? I'll just do the second one real quick too, because this is interesting. He says the correct contrapositive would be if not common genetics, then not common ancestry. Okay, that is true, actually. One of the very few things he gets right. If P implies Q, then the contrapositive is not Q implies not P, which is logically equivalent statements. This is a tautology, it's called. Okay? But the problem is that this is not even a proposition. If not common genetics, it's not a proposition. It's not truth apt. If not common ancestry, it's not propositional. What does that mean, not common ancestry? There's no evaluation of the proposition there, of the atomic proposition P. What he means to say is if P is life shares common ancestry, then the negation would be life does not share common ancestry, or it is not the case that shares common ancestry. Now you could argue, Steve, you're being a pendant here. You're pettifogging here. You're being too hard on him because maybe he's just, but unfortunately, because he doesn't understand the basics, then I'm not going to grant him any principle of charity on this because this is not a truth apt statement, right? This is a guy named Ryan or Riri on my Facebook page and a creationist group that has been blowing it up, saying how I'm wrong in logic and that he's absolutely right. And everybody that knows logic has already told him he's completely, like, ineptly, completely wrong. But it was so bad that I was like, I had to write a blog about it. So, Lawrence, if you could read my blog on it, that's in the video description. Let me know what you think. Okay. But yeah, these are not even. And by the way, he says the correct contraposition. Technically, this is not a contraposition. This is what's called a contrapositive. A contraposition is how you derive a contrapositive, right? So this is just a contrapositive. A contraposition would be how you derive the contrapositive. I don't think he understands the difference between contraposition and contrapositive. I've made the same mistake before. I will admit to this. I literally have used them interchangeably and not even thought about it, even though I know there's a difference, because there is a difference. And so I'm not going to say that I haven't made that error before, but because I know that error, then I can point it out to him, right? Because he doesn't even understand the basics, even though that's not even the same thing. I can't think of a single time creationists have been right about logic. Well, that's what's scary, because logic is objective, right? But I got this other guy who's actually, I guess, an evolution guy that doesn't understand that P and not P is a contradiction. He's literally arguing me on my page right now with me and a mathematician on my Facebook page that P and not P is not a contradiction. It's the most basic contradiction. P and not P is always false. Always, always, always. I don't know a more foundational contradiction than that. But then he gets into like some other stuff. But again, I'm going to go over that when I go over it with Josh. And I think I'm gonna have to end this soon because I'm just fading for the night. I'm not feeling great. But anyways, that's what I wanted to go over real quick. This is my introduction to this guy, Ryan. I don't even care at this point. Ryan Visser. It's just bizarre. It's just absolutely bizarre how wrong he really is. So Let me know what you guys think of this. Let me know if I've explained it decently enough. Again, I'm sorry that I just haven't been feeling that great to kind of explain this stuff. Because I love to do it. I love hanging out with you guys. I love making videos explaining stuff, and that's what I'm going to be doing on my channels. Is just education. That's really it. I'm changing it from entertainment to education, actually, and hope people get something out of it. That whether they like it or they don't like it, whatever. But if they get something educational out of it, then I feel like it's worth the time, because that's what I want to do. I want to help people. I want to educate people. A lot of people say I should have been a teacher. I wouldn't have the wherewithal to deal with the idiocy. Because when you see something like this that just thinks they know something about a topic that they don't, and that 100% of every expert would tell him he's wrong. Not a single solitary, this is not even controversial stuff. Not a single solitary person who teaches logic would ever agree with this guy. Not one. And if they did, then he would be fired, because it's that basic. It's just so fundamental that it's not even a matter of, creationism versus evolution. It's not a matter of biology, where people don't understand, DNA replication. People don't understand germline semantic. They don't understand chromosomes. They don't understand. I was watching. I real quick. I know the segue, but I was watching Dr. Dan have a discussion with Standing for Truth, and and people know that I correspond with Dr. Dan because he's been on my channel and I really like his stuff. But I couldn't believe that Dr. Dan was even dealing with this guy. Standing for Truth was just so fundamentally wrong. He didn't understand anything about biology, it seemed, even though he understands the words, but he doesn't understand the concepts. And this is when biologists go, dude, you just don't even know what you're talking about. Right? I'm a layperson, and I could tell that Danny from Standing for Truth didn't know what the heck he was talking about. And Dr. Dan was just running all over him, right? Because he just wasn't grasping the fundamentals, because he never had the fundamentals. This is why he's probably a creationist, because he never had the fundamentals to understand why he was wrong. And so I think that Ryan or Riri, is in the same position as Danny, Standing for Truth, because he doesn't understand the foundations of logic well enough to know why he's even, not even wrong, right? What's that? What was it that they were talking about? There was something about Danny didn't even know, and I don't even remember what he was being asked. He was Dr. Dan asked him something. What was it about? And I'm just trying to remember. Now it bothers me, and I can't remember something. Right? I'm trying to find the video. Maybe I could just. I think it was on chromatin. I think he asked something on chromatin, maybe. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, that's what it was. He was asking about heterochromatin. He was asking Danny, Standing for Truth, the creationist, about heterochromatin, and how that actually works. Now, it's been a long time since I looked into that, so I'm not going to embarrass myself. But I mean, from what I remember about, how DNA compactifies itself is around a histone modification, and then you have with methylation, acetylation, and that means the DNA is wrapped around these histones and compactified, so the polymerase can't really easily access it. Now, I've read somewhere that that's really not as strong of a case that it used to be. Again, this is something that completely changed since I learned biology. Okay, but when I learned biology, and even when I took it in college, DNA polymerase would actually attach to the DNA, but because it was binded to the histone, or if it had been acetylated or had a methylated, it couldn't attach very well. But I guess later on they're finding that's not really the case. But that's beyond my purview. But at least I understood that, when you have a methyl group or methylization of the DNA, it doesn't transcribe as much. It doesn't have transcription as much. And so if it doesn't have just transcription as much, then it causes a lower overall transcription rate, right? It down, what is it called? Down regulates. And so he was asking Standing for Truth all these questions, and Standing for Truth didn't have a clue about heterochromatin. And I was just screaming internally. I'm like, oh my God, this guy is like claiming that all biology is wrong, but he can't even understand the fundamentals of transcription or histone modification or anything like that. And so I was really like impressed by Dr. Dan being able to like sit there and just not lose his mind. But again, not neither here nor there. If SJ can teach, you certainly can, Steve. Well, that's high praise, I guess, and rather insulting to SJ, but I get you. Yeah, that's. Yeah. I'm not going to touch that one, brother. Naturalists have fundamentals. Yes, about when in logic, Atangelo. I mean, if you think that my logic is wrong, please show my logic is wrong. Would you agree, Atangelo, that this is modus ponens here? Because your creationist buddy says it's invalid and unsound. Is this valid? Is it sound? And if it's not sound, which proposition or premise is false? You know? But is this valid? Because he says it's invalid. Whether it's sound or not, whatever. I'm not going to get into the creationist nonsense of they thinking that all life isn't really related. But even then, they would have to say that in order for this to be unsound, one of these premises have to be false. This or this, right? And the only way for this premise to be false is if this atomic proposition is false and this is true. So for that to be false, then life would have to share common genetics, but not share common ancestry, which you could argue, but of course science would say that it's sound. But Antangelo, is this valid or invalid? I want you to answer that question, please. Because this is your creationist buddy that says he knows logic, the fundamentals. And I'm not even a naturalist, by the way. You know, my views on naturalism and metaphysics are much more complicated than most of these average or below average people out there just talking about these topics. I'm not saying I'm advancing it, but I've just put a lot of time into really nuancing my views on metaphysics. You know, I tend to source physicalism. I tend to non-reductive physicalism, which is not a true form of naturalism. So, you know. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there because Antangelo is obviously not going to answer. Shocking. But my blog is in the video description. I linked to the truth tables here, so you can actually go through and see through the truth tables how a premise is true or false, and it only matters the values of the propositions, the atomic propositions. Because I told him, look, being sound is not dependent upon the values of the atomic propositions by necessarily so. They are indirectly affected by that. Right? Well, I mean, it depends on your mode, right? Not your mode. I'm sorry. It depends on your rule of inference, right? Because like here, if P is true, then the whole premise is just P, right? So it is directly related to the atomic proposition. But this right here is only related to the atomic propositions by the truth values of P and Q. If both P and Q are false, this is true. If both P and Q are true, this is true. If P is false and Q is true, this is true. The only time this is false is if P is true and Q is false. That's it. Absolutely it. And again, you can see that on the implication truth table right here. The only time this is false if P is true and Q is false. That's it. And so I have this truth tables in the video description. But yeah, please read my blog and let me know what you guys think. Leave me a comment on this video if you guys see any error I made in my logic in my blog. And if you think that this guy, Riri, I'm just going to call him from now on, knows anything about basic logic. Would you guys do that for me? All right, guys, I will be trying to stream with Josh about this. I don't think we'll be able to do it tomorrow. We might be, but I'll try next weekend because he only has the weekends free. But if anybody else wants to stream on logic, let me know. Kimomaki, I'm going to try to get that video out by Wednesday. It's just been difficult to really be able to make these videos. And I really like making these videos, these introduction to video logic series. I think I made a banger video on the Non Sequitur Show channel about the 10 reasons why I think Christianity is false. I think that's a banger video, man. And I haven't had any theist criticize it. I mean, sure. I mean, maybe, superficial criticism, but I haven't anybody review my video. And I'm sure they'll tear it apart. Don't get me wrong. There are things to criticize when it comes to, Christianity being true or false. I get that, right? There's no objective fact of the matter. Like logic has an objective fact of the matter. P and not P objectively is false. There's no subjectivity there. It is objectively logically false. If you think otherwise, you're just wrong, right? But if you think Christianity is true or false, there's no objective matter to be had to determine who's right and who's wrong. Until God shows himself, there's just nothing there. We don't know. It's all belief. People can claim they know, but I think any claims of knowledge are misguided. They can claim they believe, and that's fine. You can justify believing in God. You can justify believing in Christianity. You can justify Christianity is false. These are all justifiable positions. My video justifies my position why I believe that the Christian God doesn't exist. That's it. It doesn't prove the Christian God doesn't exist. It just gives you justifications why I believe it. And if you want to attack those justifications, by all means, that's what this is for. That's what a good debate is. That's what a good discussion is. Attacking your justifications more than anything else. But you can't attack my justifications in logic if you don't understand logic. You cannot ever justify saying something like P and not P is not always false. There's no way you can justify that logically. It's just wrong. It's always false. But anyways, all right, I'm going to wrap it up, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Kimomaki, like I said, thank you for moderating always. That's why I'm going to take requests. I have tons of people give me so many requests for videos, and so I'm good. But if you want to special request something, put it in the video comment, and I will try to make a video mostly on something that you didn't understand. Right? When I want to make videos on are things that people just maybe haven't quite understood but would like to. Like the Fred Geach embedding problem is a little difficult to grasp because a lot of people maybe not understand the nuance of what they're actually being said. And that's why I really think that my video might explain that better. Or the Monty Hall problem. I just did that to see if I could. And my Monty Hall problems explain the Monty Hall problem, right? Which, by the way, took a lot of time to do those graphics, let me tell you. I don't recommend it. I do not recommend doing standalone videos with graphics if you have less than maybe 100,000 subs. I don't recommend it at all. It's too time consuming. You make $1 a video, $2 a video at most, and you're spending 8 hours doing it. So unless you really enjoy doing it like I do, there's no monetary reason to make standalone videos if you're under 100,000 subs, in my opinion. But I do it because I enjoy it. That's it. So with that, guys, or if you have Patreons, like I'm doing it because I have Patreons, and I have people like Kimomaki who moderates for me. And so the people that support my channel, by all means, if you have a suggestion, I will try to make a video on your suggestion. And I'll put the link to my Patreon in the video description. Because, well, yeah, I I think if you want to be able to explain something and you donate $1 or $2, I'm going to do it. $5 is better. $10 is great. But, I'll take $1 or $2 for a video because, again, I only make $1 or $2 a video. So I will put my Patreon in the video description for Steve McRae, not the Non Sequitur Show one. That's if you like the Non Sequitur Show. But let me know what you think. And I'm going to do that right now because my Patreon. But like I said, Kimomaki, I'm going to really try to get that out for you, okay? Because, nested loops. You want to go back to the nested loops? I'm sorry. Let me do that. I'm sorry. All right. So I need to know exactly what you mean by a nested. I know what a nested loop is when it comes to programming, but are you talking about a hierarchy of loops? Like for example, a nested loop could be something like 10 print hello, 20 go to 10, right? That's a loop. And then you can have a nested loop in the side of that for some other condition. So I'm not big into programming anymore. I haven't programmed in years. So I really need to know what you mean by a nested loop, because a nested loop again is a loop within a loop. So if you have if then conditional, And then inside that loop, you have a different conditional for a nested loop. Then you would have multiple branches from your initial for then statement. But that's, again, programming, which is not my thing, but I haven't programmed in years. I used to program in Visual Basic. I actually wrote a database for my Radio Shack store to keep track of Radio Shack Unlimited products. So I programmed in Basic for years. TI Basic, GW Basic. I knew a little bit of assembly. I knew a little bit of what's the language called Focal at one time, which was a mini computer, which I don't remember anything from. But I need to know what you mean by nested loop. Slam Arden says, thanks, Steve. Check out Grok and much love. I will do that, Slam Arden. Thank you very much. I will absolutely do that. And I very much appreciate the super chat. How does that look in practice? Dude, I would have to like write a piece of code, I guess, because it's been that long time. I mean, I would just imagine something like 10, if I would do it in GW Basic or Standard Basic, 10, if X is less than something, then this, then branch. 20, if this, then branch here. Then 30, do this. 40, and else then, or else if, as a because usually you have if then you have else, right? So if this is a condition, do this, else do this, and then you can have inside of that some other loop that is inside that branching. So it's just a nested hierarchy saying that if then, if this, then that, and so inside of that, if then do this, else that. Inside of that, between the else, you have some other loop. That's really the only thing I can really say on it. Yeah, there you go. Like I assume this is if you use an echo, I haven't seen echo used in ages. Echo basically means print to the screen. But yeah, it's just C language, Samanelli. So I don't know if C uses echo, but like I said, I don't program that kind of stuff any longer. I haven't for 30 years, basically. So anyways, thank you, Samanelli. I appreciate it. JavaScript. Okay. JavaScript. Yeah. Primitive. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I don't write in JavaScript. Never even learned it. But I can see you're just doing a for next loop, basically. And if you start with the initial condition, count up. I think plus means to add 1 to I, right? If I remember something, if you start off with I equals 0, if I is less than 10, if I is less than 10, starting at 0, you add 1 to I, right? That's what plus means, if I remember from programming. Okay, so, and then, print your result. But yeah, it's been a long time since I looked at, any kind of programming language. I tried looking at Python again, but I didn't want to get back into it. I tried learning Python ages ago. And I was like, you know what? I'll never use this. So I just stopped. But anyways, I've gone on way too long. I gotta end this. It's just too much for me. And I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for watching. And let me know what you think in the comment section. If my logic is wrong, let me know what you think of this guy, Riri. And if you think if it makes any sense in logic, let me know. Right? Just let me know. But please leave a comment in the comment section. That means more to me than anything. I love the super chats. Don't get me wrong. But when people comment, it shows that they're engaging. Well, I guess super chats does do too. But they don't stay forever. Well, they do in the live chat, but I don't know. I'm not trying to say I don't like super chats. I really, really do. And I appreciate them a lot. But if you don't feel like giving a super chat, just leave a comment. Everybody should leave a comment. That really helps me out. All right. Good stuff, Steve. Go on Jim Bob Soup. Jim Bob hates me. He blocked me. Yeah, Jim Bob blocked me. I just eviscerated him, and he doesn't like that. And he just like twisted everything around to his people. I just have no interest. I mean, I don't care. I didn't block him. But yeah, I mean, he had so much wrong, right? He's another guy that thinks he knows stuff he doesn't know about. So, but please read my blog. I appreciate it. And I will bid you guys good night. Good night.